Okay, good day everyone. Today we'll cover sort of the key themes around sustainability in packaging. I'm Daniel Nordigärden. I'm a partner. I'm based out of Detroit in the US, spending all my time in the packaging space around these themes. I'm joined here by my colleague Anne. I will hand it over to her for a quick introduction before we get going on the key themes. Anne?
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, I'm Anne Grimmelt. I'm a senior expert for McKinsey out of the Stanford US office, and I focus really on consumer and market trends and how they help enforce growth strategy. And of course, sustainability in packaging is a key trend to focus on today.
Thank you, Anne. Before we jump into sort of the key sort of trends we see emerging around sustainability, we wanted to highlight that, we strongly see sustainability as a really value chain shaping trend going forward. But it will be important to remember that sustainability is also shaped by other key megatrends. We see e-commerce accelerating across all types of end use areas. Consumer behavior and customer preferences are changing, supporting also the sort of acceleration of sustainability. We're also creating complexity, right, with shorter product life cycles of products. There's a lot of cost pressure in the value chains, asking for more sort of packaging material reduction, but also bringing quite complex trade-offs between cost and sustainability, how to manage that. Digitalization is something that historically has been there, but we've seen accelerating as cost curves has come down for item level tracking. And we do believe that can also be an enabler for sustainability going forward, with sort of improving efficiencies and of return and recycling, but also could it create complexity in terms of the actual recycling and separating different materials. And then also what we've seen in the light of the COVID crisis, focus and sort of a new height of concern from consumers around hygiene concerns. Hygiene has always been very important for the packaging. When you look on the inside, the filling of the packaging, what we've seen in the last sort of 12 months is then acceleration also around outer of hygiene, right? How to make sure consumers feel safe about the packaging. So we do believe that going forward, it will be important to keep in mind that sustainability is here to stay, but also reflecting and keeping an eye on how other mega trends are playing in favor or sort of helping to accelerate sustainability, or also creating some sort of things that need to be accounted to take that to account. We wanted to bring today 5 key sustainability trends that we have sort of identified through our work that we see will shape the sort of the packaging value chain over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. The first one is that consumers are actually highly concerned around sustainability, and Anne will speak more about that soon. But we also see that the consumers are quite confused what sustainability really means and how to think around sustainability and how their choices and the sort of selection of products can help enable more circular or sort of higher sustainability. The second trend is around increased regulations. Regulation around packaging is not only anything more around European Union, it's actually a much more global phenomenon right now. We see acceleration of regulation in most countries, and it's increasingly complex to manage for multinational companies. It's also something with shorter time horizons, so it needs to be managed with higher complexity, with shorter time horizons in a global sort of setting. The third one we will discuss through is also that the current value chain today has some significant gaps that just limits big changes in the near term. That can be around recycling, it can be around the infrastructure, but these gaps are sort of limiting a lot of the changes we see. At the same time, we see that brand owners and retailers are highly committed to the sort of the goals they have committed. But the market adaptation sometimes is going slowly, right? It takes time for adopting sort of and introducing new packaging materials. And with that in mind, we see, for example, at plastics, looking at all the new product launches, that plastics actually remains quite sort of steady in its in being introduced to the market, but with sort of a focus on simplifying the type of plastics being used, but also improving and using more of recycled plastics. And as a consequence, giving the sort of focus on using more recycled resins, there is an actually emerging green premium of using, recycled raw materials within plastics. So, and want to highlight, all of these sort of trends really manifest that, there's no single winning strategy within sustainability in packaging, right? And for any packaging company or any company in the packaging value chain needs to really take a portfolio of different actions to navigate these sort of 5 trends, because all of them can be sort of headwinds or tailwinds depending how you address them. With that, let me hand over to Anne, who will speak for a bit more around consumers and how we see brand owners and retailers engaging in the light of this.
Thank you. Yeah, so we do a lot of research to understand consumer sentiment and consumer behavior. Lots of these pages are focusing on the US market, but we have insights for consumers around the world. When we ask consumers how they're willing to pay for a product that shares their values and what percentage that is, then what you see on this slide is that the numbers are increasing over time for all generations but boomers. And what's also notable is that the younger consumer shares this value even more. So they're more willing to pay for products made by companies that share their values. Numbers are growing, younger consumers do it most. On the next slide, we ask consumers, how is it different since COVID started? So what are the type of attributes that you're looking for when you buy a product? And what you see on this page, consumers want it all. They want sustainability products, sustainable products, and they are interested in of companies' values. How companies treat their employees is important as well, as is the hygienic packaging. Older consumers are interested in these attributes as well, but less so. So it is really the younger consumer who's driving this. If we go to the next page, then it's interesting to see how consumers have changed since the beginning of the pandemic. This again focuses on the US. We ask consumers, what are you doing? Are you buying the same type of products? Are you buying in the same type of channels? How is your behavior different? And what we notice is that 39% of consumers in the US market chose a different brand today than that they did in the beginning of the pandemic, with close to 80% of those consumers sharing their intention to stick to this new brand. So not only did they make a change, they want to stick to this new brand that they purchased. And the reasons why they shifted varies. The most important reason is the value. They want to look for a product that is more affordable. Second reason is availability. Consumers want a product that they can find on the shelf. In the pandemic, not all products were supplied and available, so they're looking for something that's available. But really high ranking on a third and fourth reason is the purpose and the organic and natural value of the brand. So these are really highly ranked. And what's more is if we dive into it and decipher the type of consumer, we go into it by demographics, then it's again the younger consumer, the millennial and the Gen Z consumer who has these reasons even higher. So 42% of millennials and Gen Z, they value purpose as the primary reasons, and 44% of millennials and Gen Z, they also value quality and organic as the primary reasons. So it's maybe not the driver of a change of brand, but it's very highly up there and very important. Let's go to the next slide. What we see on this page is that both CPG players and retailers are committed to packaging targets. They have very high targets set. Some are further out, but some are closer to today's day. So what you see on this page is this recyclability of material is aspired to have 100% met by 2025. More recent, by 2020, is the recycling rate, with many players, many CPG players, aiming to have 100% of landfill free in the next couple of years, by 2020 really. And this is across the board for CPG players and retailers. And what I find very noticeable is that there used to be a core set of players who aspire to have these ambitions, and now the number of companies who make these claims and really try to hold themselves accountable to these standards is growing. On the next slide, we dive into what we've heard at CACNY. Now, CACNY stands for the Consumer Analyst Group of New York. And what it is, it's the largest consumer conference where a group of about 30 CEOs and CFOs present their results and their strategies to about 1,000 buy and sell sides analysts. It happens every year in February. And what you see over time is the themes that we've heard at these conferences are shifting. ESG used to be really at the bottom of the list. Many companies spoke about ESG at CAGNY, but really it was at the bottom of the list of their importance. Over time, it's creeping up. And we see that in many of their presentations where ESG is much more a center of the presentations that we hear at CAGNY. And that's, of course, a good thing. If we go on the next slide, then we see not only do we see that ESG is becoming the center of a strategy, it's no longer the afterthought, it's really entire strategies is built around ESG. This page is from Nestle with nice quotes about the importance of sustainability. There's also support about the percentage of consumers that are taking sustainability into consideration of their purchasing decisions. 60% of consumers consider it important, and what's more, 1 in 5 are willing to pay a premium for sustainable products. On the right-hand side of this slide, you see the third change that we saw at CAGNY, and that is that various players, L'Oreal and Nestle are 2 of them, are really stressing to the analyst community that financial and sustainability goals can coexist. So it's no longer focusing on one or the other, or assuming that the analyst community is supposed to pay for sustainability efforts. They can mutually exist. Companies can do both, can be financially rewarded and having very strong sustainability goals. With that, I hand it back to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Anna. Well, having said that, and it's clear that sort of this getting more and more important to really accelerate quickly around sustainability, and as we mentioned, right, they are keen to keep their sort of targets. But we also see that they are making progress. They're making progress, but further acceleration is likely needed to really reach this kind of sustainability commitments that are only a few years out. But if you look on this page with a selection, and of course not exhaustive, but an example of larger brand owners, you will see that from their sort of current baseline, most of them are making very strong sort of progress around reaching their sort of sustainability goals. But several of them have also increased the goals over the next years, which means that further acceleration is needed across the board. So there is definitely more work to be done, and even though it's moving towards sort of an acceleration. We also mentioned earlier that we went through most of the new product launches, and this is sort of a European example. We tried to understand from a sort of product launch example, where do we see sort of shifts over the last years around packaging usage? So this looks really around a couple of key larger end use areas and how we see movements in different materials being used. And as you can see on the right-hand side, right, there hasn't been a lot of sort of major shifts away from plastics. There's been some consolidation of plastics. You will see, for example, that other plastics that could be, for example, an HDP bottle, or it can be a polypropylene, or it can be polystyrene. We've seen some shifts away from that, and instead we've seen stronger growth of PET, so polyester. So it seems to some consolidation is happening on a brand owner retail level to sort of simplify the portfolio and focus on sort of more selective plastics. And we also seen sort of some other categories also growing more than others, but net, there is not a lot of sort of changes on a substrate level, except when you look more granular, where you see sort of within a substrate, there might be sort of changes from one plastic type to another plastic type. And what we do see though is that a lot of focus, as also Anna mentioned before, there's a lot of ambition to increase the recycled content of packaging going forward. So a lot of the brand owners and retailers are aiming to use much more PCR, post-consumer resin. And what this really means is that if you would sum up all the global commitments and you will compare that to the available supply of PCR for PET, you will see there is a big gap. There's almost like 5 times more demand than production capacity right now on PCR. And that really means that a lot of in a lot of markets right now, there's a quite tight market on supply of PCR, and there's often quite difficult to get access to high quality sort of food grade recycled materials. So we do expect that this focus on using recycled materials in combination with sort of infrastructure gaps and will at least for the short term being create a green premium on recycled materials or potentially keep potentially a green premium, right? That will almost disconnect the virgin sort of based polymers and recycle based polymer markets altogether. If we would then, sum up a couple of sort of key learnings from what we see around sort of the investable themes coming out from the key trends of sustainability, I think a couple of things to highlight, right? There is sort of investable themes across the whole value chain. Recyclability remains a key theme combined with recycled content, right? Thinking around sort of, both improving recyclability, new materials that can enable high recyclability, for example, monomaterials or also other type of products is one theme. As I just mentioned also, infrastructure or sort of recycling is another area where we see large investment sort of themes emerging. Then there's also another area around sort of compostables and new materials to be understood, that, materials that could be composted at home or other ways composed, not sort of traditional polymer or not traditional sort of packaging materials. And there's also an emerging sort of business area around returnable and reusable packaging. We see several brand owners testing and the concept of returnable packaging, both in food service and beauty and personal care, and even in food packaging. So the whole concept around reusable packaging is really early, and it's almost like bringing back the milkman again, right? But in a bigger scale concept with different products. And then finally, sort of not to forget, right? I mean, reducing weight is a very important area. It's always been there for the packaging industry. The next generation of lightweighting will be very, very important. Combine also to understand, what is sort of the ways to sort of cut down the greenhouse gas emissions or technologies to do so in an effective way. So to sum this up, right, we sort of suggest that you, being part of the packaging value chain, really should address sort of 3 questions to get started around investable themes to understand sort of how to take action around this. First of all, it's quite important to understand what are the granular sustainable packaging opportunities out there for you in the value chain, right? And that can include conducting a sort of a scan of, companies within technologies or areas that are sort of promising to bring sort of a solution to sort of the current key pain points of the value chain. And based on that sort of scan, it's also important to understand what are really the big bets on future materials and packaging going forward. What will really make a game changer in this industry, right? And almost characterize different products in terms of feasibility and mapping those opportunities so where we see there's a potential to really make a game change. And also, of course, not forget, right, we're speaking a lot about opportunities around materials, around packaging. There's also opportunities beyond innovations, right? And that can include, facilitating the circular business case around infrastructure or other technologies around recovery and reuse. So also taking a broader scan of potential sort of areas will be an interesting aspect to consider. So with that, thank you so much from our side, and all good. Thank you.